Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the virtual Clean Lakes 101 Science Cafe. My name is Dave Kettner, and I am the President and General Counsel at Virent. We are proud to be this month's sponsor for these talks. I'm especially looking forward to the talk this morning, as it has particular relevance to Virent, as we are working diligently to commercialize our technologies for producing renewable gasoline, jet fuel, and diesel fuel, as well as the principal building blocks for providing 100% renewable and recyclable plastics, fibers, and films, all from industrial sugars and cellulosic sugars derived from agricultural residue, woody biomass, and municipal waste. Today's talk is directly relevant as the commercialization of our technologies will provide a way for the agricultural community to find incentives and monetize their efforts to improve agricultural practices and serve as a solution provider in the global effort to positively impact our lakes and other climate goals. At this time, I want to thank the rest of the sponsors for these talks. Presenting sponsors include the First Weber Foundation and Johnson Financial Group, National Guardian Life Insurance Company as a supporting sponsor, usually hosting sponsor, the Edgewater, and production partners, the University of Wisconsin Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies and the UW Extension. Today's talk is entitled Farm, Energy, Water, and Carbon Markets. The focus will be about a new program that assists farmers in their efforts of environmental stewardship. To tell us a little bit more about the topic and introduce today's speakers is Marilee Gorman from First Weber.
Thank you, Dave. Good morning from beautiful Lake Monona. Before I get to information on today's talk, I want to thank everybody who has renewed their individual friend or their business lake partner donations this year. Here is a list of lake partners who have joined or renewed this past month. First Weber is a proud lake partner, and my husband Kevin and I are friends of Clean Lakes through the 63 Club at the Yahara Society level. In case you didn't know, the 63 Club is a reoccurring donation starting at just $8.63 a month. If you haven't donated to become a friend or lake partner, please visit cleanlakesalliance.org/donate. Back to today. As Dave mentioned, we're going to learn about a program that supports Wisconsin farm carbon management initiatives. Interesting components of this program include carbon accounting, nutrient management, which greatly helps our lakes, and building a marketplace for lower carbon inputs. Today's speakers are Tim Baye and Jessica Niekrasz. Tim is a professor of business development and an energy finance and state energy specialist at the University of Wisconsin. He has over 30 years of experience in industrial renewable energy projects and policy in education, executive, and advisory capacities. Jessica is the president of the Clean Fuel Partners, the principal at Clean Lake Fuel Connects, and a Clean Lakes Alliance community board member. She has years of experience in biogas, water quality, and related fields, as well as an understanding of the regulatory environment that exists today in Wisconsin. We're excited to have both of these speakers today present on a very interesting topic that can help our lakes. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them in the question or chat function on your screen. We'll address as many of these as we can at the end. To start today's presentation off, I'm going to hand things over to Jessica to get us going.
Thanks so much, Marilee, and good morning to everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. We've talked digesters as a group before, and this program that Tim will go into further detail about is digesters are just a piece of the puzzle. It's very exciting. We're looking at an opportunity to do good by our lakes and by our dairymen with this legislative effort that we're undergoing. I am very excited and very proud to be part of this, and the impact for our lakes is just incredible. This is really an opportunity to sequester carbon, capture greenhouse gases, do good by the environment, as well as the water, ground and surface water in the state. So I will keep it short and sweet and hand it over to Tim, who will get into the nitty-gritty details and share that information with you.
Thanks, Jess. Good morning, everyone. Pardon me as I go to save my, share my screen. Oops. And thanks for the very gracious introductions and the opportunity to talk to you today. The program that we're going to cover this morning is an outcome of many years of work and collaboration with various agency and legislative leaders. But this one is probably the most ambitious. It's championed by Assembly Representative Gary Tauken from the Shawano region. Gary is the chair of the Assembly Ag Committee. And through his leadership, he has been able to recruit committee chairs from both the Assembly and the Senate to launch a very aggressive and focused investigation of how to essentially create and enhance the structure in the carbon economy for animal ag in Wisconsin. And for any of you who've been paying attention, and I'm sure that's everybody on this webinar this morning, there's been a lot of advances from the biofuels, and the Virent story is an outstanding one. We go down that one 20 years ago with me some other time. But in solar, wind, efficiency, combined heat and power systems, and the general attention to sustainable options. And a lot's been provided to us over time. However, what there isn't is a beginning and a middle and an end to those businesses that want to manage their carbon footprint and have a set of metrics and guideposts and pathway where they can evaluate their options, evaluate where they're at, and improve on it year on year. This effort is an initiative to try to provide structure to this market, provide metrics, validity and verification that the initiatives actually being pursued are working, and really focused on the markets. The graphic you see in front of you is kind of a capstone. If you'll see up in the left corner, this is our beginning point. Conventional animal ag enterprise. So that may be dairy, maybe beef, maybe poultry, maybe hogs, sheep, goats, et cetera, et cetera. But we are focusing on animal ag as a beginning point. Anytime you take on something quite this aggressive, having a fairly narrow target to do something this comprehensive is usually a good thing. So we're focusing on animal ag. The first part of this project is to look at developing a carbon accounting system. Now, there are a whole bunch of different carbon accounting systems and protocols internationally, in the United States, and within trade groups. One of the issues involved in that is that many of the carbon standards require verification, require a kind of a fairly arduous, a fairly complicated way of setting up a carbon accounting system. And our idea is to learn from those who are already doing that, but to adopt a voluntary system through a state tax schedule. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the farm operator at the end of the year will instruct whoever's completing that tax form to collect information on things that are inputs to the farm. This is diesel, gas, land use practices, nutrients, machine time, and then other metrics such as how far do your products, does your milk travel to market, et cetera, et cetera. The idea is to capture to the greatest extent possible, kind of an 80-20 rule, okay, is capture 80% of everything with about 20% of the effort, and then file this tax form with the state of Wisconsin. As a result of filing that, then that information, one, is proprietary, and two, it holds the consequence that it must be accurate because it's a tax form. There are legal consequences to not filing accurate information in a tax form. In return, then, the animal ag enterprise will be receiving a carbon footprint of their output. Now, this term is really important, output, because there's all kinds of carbon protocols, and there's ways of allocating the carbon footprint across your operation. We're staying very focused on the output as the denominator here, and the carbon that's used as a numerator on it. So what does that do? Well, one of the primary reasons for looking at this is because in leadership in the industry, there have been two things that have really kind of risen to the top. One is the changes in buying patterns by large corporate buyers. I don't think that I know of, I swim in these circles, many large institutions, many large corporations that are not including greenhouse gas considerations into their purchasing practices. Now, that's a sea change over where it was 10 years ago. But many large corporations are filing what are called ESG reports, environmental, societal, and governance reports. This is a consequence to pressure from the financial markets, whether they be shareholder initiatives or whether they be investors or creditors putting pressure on corporations to pay attention to their environmental footprint. Either way, it's starting to happen in a big way. The other big input has been the state of California. And I've been working with the state of California for a number of years. Where they've demonstrated leadership is in their carbon intensity. It's a performance-based metrics for their systems there. And for those activities and products that they're encouraging, primarily in the energy sector, the carbon intensity rating is really important. That's what a carbon footprint evaluates, is what's the carbon intensity of the farm's output. All right, so this accounting system has one other benefit. It's proprietary. It is the proprietary information and property of the farm. So the farm can choose, once it gets its carbon footprint numbers from, say, DATCAP, it can choose to share that information or just use it for internal purposes to guide future decisions. All right, so that's probably the only real novel piece of this program. The others are a series of rule changes or statutory changes to enhance the toolkit. The toolkit being farms' on-site energy, self-owned or provided by the utility, but carbon-free energy, primarily renewable, but it doesn't always have to be the case. It can just be lower carbon. Nutrient recovery and reuse, including digesters. Carbon inputs, including the option for carbon offset programs. What's envisioned here is matching like-minded farms, like-minded businesses with farms, like-minded farms with businesses that are all seeking to manage the carbon footprint. And a key component of that will be a virtual marketplace. And then the last part of the program is to leverage what's already been done in the carbon labeling world, but to work with those carbon labeling institutions and organizations to adopt one that fits Wisconsin's system. The intention is to provide structure to this overall marketplace, provide a set of metrics, an enhanced set of tools to manage the carbon footprint with the goal of improving those that volunteer to participate, their ability to market in those markets that want carbon information as part of their program. All right, this is a you thought the first one was busy, this is a little busier, but it really does kind of highlight what the potential impact of this policy project would be. So here's a profit and loss sheet. You know, these are the sales, these are the expenses, this is the profit from the operation. And the conventional one, or no highlighting. Should each of these components be adopted, this is the potential impact. One, increased or not increased sales, maybe not even increased price, but an increased strength of relationship with the customers the farmers serve. Second group, in the yellow highlighted, are new potential sources of income. Income from power sales, income from potentially biogas sales, nutrient sales. Whoops, sorry about that. Nutrient sales, we're kind of like, we're not going there yet, but hopefully eventually that market materializes, and carbon offset sales. Okay, now one real quick clarification. If you do something that earns a carbon offset on your farm and you use it internally to reduce your carbon intensity, that's one option. If you pursue and secure a carbon offset for a change of practice on your farm and sell it to somebody else, well, that's the use of that offset, but you can't double count. All right, so that's on the revenue side. On the cost side, this program will enhance or encourage lower carbon inputs and possibly lower prices, especially in the electrical arena, where there's really no reason to pursue any project unless you got a better rate. On this last column is highlighted on where these rules or actions will be originated or affected within the state of Wisconsin. All right, so let's delve into this a little bit more. Carbon accounting. One, again, it's a voluntary program utilizing a state tax return. Reason for the state tax return is one, it enhances the validity and allows for self-verification of your carbon information, and does it in a proprietary and confidential way. Thirdly, if we do our job well on this, the cost of compliance, the cost of doing this carbon accounting will be minimal. Perhaps a couple of extra hours that the farm will pay their accountant or spend staff time or owner operator time in this. Let me go back this real quick. One of the key elements of this whole process since we launched it in January was the reviews that we got. And one of the initial reviews was, this looks great, but is this designed for large animal ag operations and leaving the small operators behind? Well, there caused a lot of thinking, and actually the questions made the argument even stronger, at least in my view. Each one of these tools, this on-farm energy, nutrient recovery, carbon offsets, or producing lower carbon intensity inputs, each of those efforts have to stand on their own. It has to pencil out. Farmers not going to do it just because it feels good. Well, some might, but most of them are going to do it because it makes economic sense. They're going to do an on-farm energy system or nutrient recovery or pursuing all of that. But because this is the guidepost, this is the most important part, is the carbon footprints, the cornerstone of this program. What the program does is it rewards those who've taken these initiatives and this leadership, gone and sustainable practices in the past. Whereas most programs reward new behavior or future behavior, term is called additionality. This program rewards not just new behavior, but past behavior as well. So a grass-fed operation is going to start with a lower carbon footprint. And this program, they may not pursue anything else, but by just having this carbon accounting, they can calculate the carbon footprint, and it should reflect well in terms of their competitiveness. If it's an operation that hasn't done anything to this point, but is considering it, well, that's where all these tools come into play. All right. On-site grid, on-site energy and grid services. The ask of this program keys on three things. One, we're asking the state of Wisconsin, the Public Service Commission, or through a legislative initiative to adopt standardized contracts for what's called a power purchase agreement, which is when the farm or the host owns the asset. Let's say it's a solar array, and then it uses that solar array to supply its power, and sells that power to the utility, and then buys power back from the utility to support its load. We're asking for standardized contracts across all jurisdictions that are regulated by the Public Service Commission, as well as looking at statutory changes to include rural electric co-ops and municipalities under the same set of rules. What that standardized contract will do then is define net metering policy, which we're asking to be changed to 100% of the load, the peak load of the farm. Right now, that net metering policy varies from utility to utility. Utilities set their own rules. We're asking for a statewide rule on that. The second is we're asking for this contract to address the price that the farm receives back from the utility, whether that's a full retail recovery price or not. That's what we're going to be investigating and debating. But equally as important is that we're asking the contracts to address what it's called FERC 2222. Well, what's FERC 2222? It's a recent order from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that requires the regional transmission organizations, the RTOs. We're in MISO, the Midwest Independent Service Operators. It requires them to develop a set of rules that allows for these distributed generation facilities, the solar array on the milk shed, to compete on equal terms with the utilities into the wholesale and grid services market. Now, I'll repeat that. It requires the FERC order, which was promulgated last year in 2020, requires the regional transmission organizations to create a market for distributed generation to compete in the wholesale and grid services market. So we're asking that the state take leadership here and develop standardized contracts for all of these types of transactions that include the price, net metering, and these FERC order. What does that mean? It means that if you as a dairy operator or as hog operator put a solar array on your buildings, you will then be net metered for what you produce, saving costs for you. You will then be transferring all these electrons to the utility, and they get to trade them like any other inventory. They get to either offset generation, or they get to sell to their neighbor utilities, or they get to enter into the wholesale market. What we're asking is that a small portion of those transactions flow back to the host for the facility. Now, in some cases, these facilities, this on-site energy, may be provided by the utility. It's more or less commonly called an energy as a service arrangement, in which the utility comes in, builds the facility, pays you a lease, offers you a discount, et cetera, but utilizes your facility as an asset. We're asking that those contracts also be standardized across the state. Biogas and nutrient management. I've had the pleasure of being a technical reviewer and advisor to the California Air Resources Board, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and the University of California system, particularly UC Davis. What they got from me, I'm not sure, but what I got from that experience was a whole lot of learning. And really the big takeaway that's, I think, is applicable to the state of Wisconsin is what the state of California did in terms of nutrient management, encouraging advanced nutrient management, and in terms of expanding the gas collection infrastructure in California. What they did was encourage the large gas distribution companies to expand the pipelines for collection of gas, and then enhanced the easement process. But the developers are still responsible for building the last mile. What that did is made the opportunity for biogas production and transportation into the California's low carbon fuel standard market, which is a very robust market. It made it easier, more feasible. So what we're asking is for the state to sponsor an exploration of the gas pipeline system and to begin developing some engineering studies and preparation to expand that infrastructure, not to distribute gas, but to collect gas from more animal ag operations. The second part of that will be to standardize the gas interconnection agreements, the standards, and the tolling fees for the transport of these gas. This is kind of a novel new industry, not really old in the United States. And each of these projects tend to be a one-off. The industry and many that are involved, vested stakeholders, are strongly encouraging a standardization of practices and commercial agreements. And so we're sponsoring that as well. Carbon inputs and offsets. The carbon input topic is a fairly straightforward one. It's to facilitate a regional marketplace, matching like-minded entities with each other. So if I'm a dairy operator and I have historically bought forage from my neighbors, I'm going to go to my neighbors and say, hey, I'm managing my inputs. Anybody want to come along for the ride? If not, going to contact this marketplace and perhaps find another forage provider who's also managing the carbon input and carbon footprint of the forage, maybe a mile or two down the road. The carbon offset market is a fascinating, complex, hot mess, but it potentially provides a tremendous opportunity to reward changes in practices and soil carbon sequestration. But the science and the commercial practices are new, and most stakeholders are involved are saying it's uncertain, that there's not a high degree of confidence that the money, the terms, the practices, the standards are anywhere near optimized and anywhere near truly reflecting what changes in agronomy practices, nutrient management practices generate in terms of a carbon offset. But I think this is kind of healthy at this moment in that we're taking also leadership in this, and then saying, okay, we're recognizing the opportunity and potential here, but we need to know more, and we need to make certain that the science as well as the economics are in sync. So one, we're immediately looking at a virtual marketplace and matchmaking. The second is to begin working with the current carbon offset marketers to understand their standards and programs better, and then look to sponsor an enhanced set of science behind that. This is, pardon me, I wasn't able to simplify this before this session today, but really, if you follow the graphic here, this is the essence here. To set a floor value for soil carbon, which is really a very low entry level, couple dollars per acre per year, so that it encourages enrollment in the program. And more conventional tillage goes to no-till and cover crops. Okay, it's a pretty straightforward practice, and they get their feet wet in there. Then that value of that carbon gets enhanced the more it gets verified. And the general philosophy is that older carbon in the soil is worth more than new carbon in soil. So it's kind of the inverse of how the oil and gas and mining industries get rewarded, in that carbon today, or their oil or coal or minerals today, is worth more than it is in the future. In this case, it's the inverse of that. The longer that carbon stays in the soil, the higher the value, so that the financial instruments that reflect that has to also be set up that way. So it's kind of it's a daunting task, but what's really important here is that, one, there's a lot of experimentation going on. So there's a lot of attention. There's a lot of investors looking at this space. And those who are involved recognize that the science is immature yet. So rather than just push forward, we'll say, okay, here's a beginning point. Now let's improve it continuously over time. And then the last part of this is a carbon labeling program, is to offer, through voluntary practices, participating farmers and eventually the processors of those farm products, the opportunity to adopt a carbon labeling program that the state of Wisconsin will work with these institutions on developing for the problem, for the farmers. Why is that important? Well, these corporate buyers. And within the corporate marketplace, there are three types of protocols: what's called Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, or Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. Scope 1 is the carbon footprint, or is the carbon that's being emitted out of the smokestacks from the enterprise's operations, or what they're directly emitting into the atmosphere. Scope 2 is what's the carbon included in the power and fuels that you buy to run your business from somebody else, like your utility. Scope 3 is the challenging one. And that is, what's the carbon footprint of your supply chain? So the overall intent of this is to provide that carbon footprint for those buyers by the accounting system and by a set of tools to manage that carbon footprint, so that it fits right into the buyer's metrics. We make it easy and we make it attractive for food processors to buy Wisconsin products, because we've done the heavy lift and the hard work to calculate what the carbon accounting is of those products, so that then they can report that in their supply, Scope 3, or supply chain carbon accounting. How are we doing this? Well, there are 5 teams. There's a carbon accounting study team, a biogas study team, an on-farm energy team, carbon offset supply team, and a carbon labeling team. Each one of these teams have a private sector and a public sector co-team leader. All the public sector co-team leaders are committee chairs, either from the Senate or the Assembly. The private sector ones are from the engineering space, from the environmental attributes space, from the utility and farming world, from trade associations and marketing organizations, and our dear Jessica Niekrasz is the private sector team leader in the carbon labeling team. This is ambitious. It's been reviewed, the document, the program. There's like 100-page deck that goes into the weeds on each one of these topics. It's been reviewed by about 50, 60 professionals, really great critiques. And to this point, we're encouraged. We've gone through the organizational meetings with the work groups. The larger committees are now forming and meeting this next month. The hope is that by the last week of September, first week of October, the formal notice, invitation to comment will go out. We've structured this process to mirror, in many ways, a Public Service Commission docket, in that we'll post the question or the ask, and then send out information packages, provide webinars and training support for respondents, and then give a timetable, hopefully end of November, and a Dropbox system where comments can be provided by stakeholders and individuals. The objective is to have these asks reviewed, critiqued, commented on, and ready for consideration in the Assembly and Senate committee structure by January of 2022. And with that, I'm going to stop the share, take a breath. I've done this a few times, but you're a hard audience and an important one, so I'm trying to keep enough time for Q&A.
Tim, fantastic. A lot of time for Q&A. So if we're having the questions are starting to roll in again, if you're watching and you want to ask a question, use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen or the chat, whatever is more convenient for you. But I got a couple here. We'll kick it off right away. And I think both you and Jessica, I think, can kind of just ping pong off of these because I think you probably both have some great insight into these questions. Somebody right off the bat asked, have any well-established environmental advocates, endorsed program or programs like this? So maybe nonprofits, maybe politicians. Is there endorsements for programs like this?
You're on mute, Jess.
Yep, I noticed that. My screen popped up and said, you're on mute. Yay, more coffee, please. So we've been essentially road showing this. We've shared this with many groups and had incredible response. We've shared it with Renew Wisconsin. We've shared it with farmer-led groups. It's been, we're hoping to poke holes in this early to, sort of direct our focus in areas where we could patch through it. But there's a lot of support for this. We've shared it with tons of people. And, the fact that this is being led by Representative Gary Talkin is super exciting. We have the endorsement of several co-chairs on those committees that are also on the Republican side of the aisle.
And I think that, somebody else kind of asked more or less the same question. Is there bipartisan interest in this program? And what I'm hearing is yes.
Yes, there is. All right.
That's the simple answer. I'm sure
that's the simple answer. I've been doing this a long time. Most of my work, I don't teach classes. Most of my work is behind the scenes, working in the with the agency, the legislature, and the policy space, but with bankers, engineers, developers. That's really where my expertise is. This is my first real serious effort into the policy world. So I reached out to the Clean Wisconsin's, the farmers unions. I'm part of the grasslands group at UW, so understanding the whole grass-fed animal industry. And we got a lot of feedback from them. Some of it was very pointed, as I explained earlier. Is this oriented just to large animal operations? And that was a great question. It required us to dig deep to make certain that this was flexible enough, especially to reward past practices. That's where the real, I think the sizzle to this is that it differentiates its way of calculating what your carbon incentive is by allowing you to reflect as an animal operator to past practices as well as future. That's kind of what differentiates this from a lot of the others. Surprisingly, the more feedback we've got from EDF, even Sierra Club has given favorable comments to this. So proof will be in the pudding, as Jess said, if the final rules, how they pan out. But in doing this for more than 20 years, I have rarely experienced a situation where there hasn't been a yeah, but after about 10 days of consideration. And this has been on the street now discreetly, but on the street since probably mid-March. And we haven't heard a yeah but yet.
Somebody did ask a great question. What is there a time frame that you would anticipate for implementation? Is there reality versus expectations? I mean, I know you can't pinpoint specifics, but is there anything you can make a ballpark guess on?
Yes. In 6 days, PSC docket addressing contracting closes. Okay, so there'll be comments submitted by some of the stakeholders involved in this into the PSC docket. The beginning of a virtual marketplace to matching like-minded farmers is being discussed right now. Jess and I are meeting with some of the agency folks this afternoon. We're going to talk about budgets and timetable for doing that. Carbon accounting and offsets. Those marketers are on the street right now. Do we have an organized statewide approach in evaluating those soil carbon offset providers? No, we don't. But that's not going to take a statutory change. Okay, that's going to take a couple of people and a budget to be able to facilitate and organize that. We have launched just this past week, Ledge Council reviews to begin evaluating all the statutes that are being touched on by this program and the state tax code and the formation of a voluntary tax form. That's novel. So we don't know yet. To be honest, Adam, we don't know what that timetable is going to be.
Good question, or good answer. You're going to kind of combine a couple together, bringing it back here to Clean Lakes 101. Someone was asking, can you kind of connect the dots between lake quality and is there an ask to the public to our members to help in this effort? And, is there something we will see that changes the watershed landscape to help our lakes because of this?
Jess, want to take a stab?
So yeah, any practice that we can support, through the generation of credits, whether that's cover crops in the winter or collected sort of clustering smaller farms to create a digester facility for RNG. Those kinds of efforts have that direct impact on the lakes. The other thing that happens though is that if we're sequestering, if practices are being rewarded for sequestering carbon and offsetting greenhouse gases, not getting those released into the lakes or into the atmosphere, then the lakes will benefit that because we're slowing the heating of the earth. So that's my first stab at it.
This is one of those classic cases where the sexy controversial topic tends to dominate and the fundamentals behind it kind of get pushed in the background. This whole thing about soil carbon sequestration and change of practices, what Jess just said is spot on, is that these change of practices will retain nutrients, encourage recovery of nutrients, reward tillage practices, reward cover crops, etc. And if the drama around the price of the carbon or how long the carbon lasts in the soil dominates the conversation, then we forget about all the additional benefits these practices provide for, especially soil and surface and groundwater improvement. So the more that like-minded folks that would be part of the Alliance in particular can encourage, one, the practices, and two, the exploration of these voluntary carbon offset markets, the better we all are, because then we provide instruments for people to make investments.
Sure. A good question here. Someone asked, Clean Lakes, our partnership with our agricultural community is very important because there are so many farmers here in the watershed that are, really pushing to try to make the change. Our agricultural partners are doing such a fantastic job. And the question in a roundabout way was, how are those farmers being engaged with the development of these type of government programs? Are they being brought to the table? Are the actual farmers on the ground? And Jessica, I know that Clean Fuel Partners works with a number of family farms that have been in generational farms. So I think that's a kind of a valid question, is how are the farmers being brought to the table?
So one of our partners in this effort is another nonprofit organization called the Wisconsin Biomass Energy Coalition. And that is bringing together folks who are interested in the intersection of agriculture, water, and, and the environment. So WBEC, it has offered free membership to the farms, so that we can have them at the table as we go through this policy effort. Their input, I just spoke to Peninsula Pride yesterday about, joining, for those farms to join the organization so we can, listen, I think what happens often is we assume we know what the farms need, and we don't ask the farms actually what they need. What would be the impact of this on your farm and your practices? And, given the experience that I've had, running a digester, we had to make a lot of pivots once we got that feedback. So I want to make sure those folks are at the table with us as we go through this effort.
Adam, individual farms, individual farm operators, farm trade organizations are all intimately entwined in this. I grew up on a dairy farm. I own a farm. So there's if I'm the primary author behind this, my sensibilities are on this as well.
Good. Fantastic. I'm just going to kind of keep going with these questions here. Somebody asked a kind of an interesting question. Assuming that there had been economic modeling done, what are maybe the large or the major cost sensitive drivers? And are there any projected outcomes with current market pricing?
Oh, Tim,
that's a pretty wide open.
It is a wide, and I don't, we could just narrow it down to, are there any, maybe just like, what is the modeling showing? Maybe that's an easier way to start with it.
Right. Well, let's take a little step back, and it says, what really are we asking? These are all primarily administrative rule changes, almost all of them. They're rule changes about the relationship between the utility and the farm who owns or hosts a energy project. It is rule changes in the relationship between the pipeline and the biogas generator. It's rule changes regarding soil conservation practices, soil carbon practices. And then the additional programs are like market to marketplace or doing the soil carbon science. So there's not a lot of dramatic public sector investment here, impact on the state budget in terms of an ask or additional tax revenue or proceeds or borrowing. These are rule changes to facilitate a better, more efficient, more effective marketplace for these efforts. The only big part of that, it'd be the infrastructure part, is the biogas collection pipeline expansion. That there will be. And Adam, I don't know what that is yet. We haven't gotten to that point because we haven't done the baseline. We don't even know what the baseline is yet in Wisconsin.
And this is just an interesting question, I thought too, and it's so very timely with the Senate passing the infrastructure bill yesterday, I guess. Are there opportunities to use some of those funds to make direct investments into initiatives like this?
That was the intent in January.
Okay.
What we expected at infrastructure, we wanted the state to be in a position to be prepared to act quickly, and through involved stakeholders in this process, our U.S. senators and congressional representatives have all been briefed on this, and some of their staff are participants in the work groups. So we're hoping to be in a really good position. We've also had discussions with USDA, both former executives in USDA as well as current agency administrators. So they understand. Almost to a point, well, not just almost, to the point is Representative Talkin has offered Wisconsin to be an experiment for the United States in looking at putting this structure together.
So that kind of leads into the next question I was going to ask. Outside of maybe California, are we the kind of the first one? Are there any other working examples of this sort of market working in another state that we're following, or are we kind of setting the path here in Wisconsin, perhaps?
In some aspects, this program is more advanced than California, because California, well, it has all kinds of offset programs and the low carbon fuel standard. What it doesn't have is a cradle to grave program of metrics, this carbon accounting thing, that it does not have. It's considering. North Carolina has a somewhat similar model in certain sectors, but not as comprehensive. I've heard Indiana's considering something. Iowa's just beginning that point. So actually, one of the first efforts that is being asked of the Ledge Council is to do a comprehensive evaluation of similar initiatives in the state. I mean, in the United States.
You would have to imagine it's the Midwest where most of these are going to happen, where all the big production of.
Well, I don't think I'm going on a limb here and saying that animal ag enterprises have a pretty big target on their back in terms of their contributions to GHG. And so that, in a large part, that informed our focus right off the get-go.
Somebody asked an interesting question here about, in kind of a roundabout way, about maybe unintended negative consequences. You know, is there life cycle analysis research indicating that grass-fed beef requires more water, land footprint versus grain-fed beef? In sort of a roundabout way, is there more of a cultural issue attached to this? You know, getting people to eat less beef that's going to cause less draw on the land. And I mean, I know we're not. There's no drastic things here that can be said, but I'm just wondering if there are any sort of long-term, I don't know, consequences or framework issues. And this is a very hypothetical question, I guess, and maybe there's just no good way to answer a hypothetical question like that.
If history repeats itself, will there be mistakes made? Yeah. Will there be abuses? Yeah. Will there be those who try to game the system and not add to it? Yeah. Will there be egg on somebody's face somewhere down the line? Yeah, there will be. Okay. I don't know how to avoid any of that. All right. But I think all of us who are interested in this topic think that sometimes taking risks, and if the IPCC report that just came out is accurate, then we better be taking some robust risks.
Right. I can't confirm this, but somebody mentioned that Hawaii and California had similar programs, and sort of once solar penetration got high, they had to move away from it. Does solar penetration going to have a direct impact on this, or will it? The way that
eventually, but if those standardized contracts materialize that reward what's called a capacity payment, right? What that means is then if I put storage along with my solar array, or let's say I put biogas and I'm running a genset instead, a generator instead, and I'm storing the gas and running it at night, because that complements and I get a better return on my investment for grid services, the market's going to adopt to that. And what the California experience has been is that it's called the duck curve, in having over penetration of solar. California, we owe a lot of debt to them because they've done a lot of experimentation, and we can get ahead of that. We can learn from them and avoid it. And most of the utilities have studied that experience pretty closely. But having a series of microgrids, which is in fact what these standardized contracts will encourage, will really contribute to the resiliency of the grid, power outages, and also give the hosts a lot of flexibility to optimize the economics behind.
A couple of questions here. One is just a very simple one. Someone asked, can you just restate the name of the effort so when they discuss it, they know exactly what to call it?
It's a mouthful.
Is there an elevator?
University people involved, they just don't know when to shut up.
Let's add one more word: farm, energy, water, and carbon market development, I guess, is probably the best way the shortest way I can think to say it.
I think if you call it Wisconsin's Farm Carbon Initiative, that would probably be.
I like that.
I think you sort of answered this question, but I want to kind of ask it again. Wondering if and Jessica, since I know your company deals with some smaller family-run farms, you know, this is encouraging maybe some large-scale farming changes, but how does it change farmers, how they actually do their business, and maybe some of those smaller farms? Is this something that the smaller family farm is still going to actually benefit from on their bottom line, which is so very razor thin?
Right. It is. The input that they give on these forms, they'll receive information back saying, you know, to determine if it's worth it to do these various practices. The opportunity is open to them. The feedback is free. I mean, that's going to come from the state. So that is more information, more data points that they can have to assess whether or not it makes sense for their bottom line.
So Adam, let me segue on what Jessica said. So if I'm running a 5,000 head confined animal facility, and I'm shipping everything in, my corn, my forage, my supplements, and I'm shipping everything out, my carbon footprint is going to be substantial, okay? Because I've got my inputs, the carbon associated with all my inputs, and I've got my scope 1 emissions, the methane and volatile organics coming off of my lagoons. If I've got a grass-fed operation and I've got 150, I don't have anywhere near the carbon footprint in my inputs. Now, do I still have methane emissions? Yes, I do. But they're primarily aerobic, not anaerobic. Okay, there's a different composition of that gas and how it's being released in the atmosphere. So at the end of the day, in terms of carbon intensity, if I'm a grass-fed operation, my CI, my carbon intensity, is going to have a lower beginning point than my counterpart in the confined animal operation.
Sure.
Yeah, additionally, this could allow several smaller farms to have it be financially feasible for several smaller farms to cluster together and create a digestion, processing center for RNG. So that would also, that's another opportunity that exists out there, and investment in these kinds of facilities. I mean, there's people sniffing this out all over the state because RNG is just such a hot topic.
Sure.
It may not be a digester. It might just be a solid separator.
Yeah.
Okay, where they pool their manure resources, separate the solids so they can more effectively apply on the land at times of the year where it's a lot less vulnerable to runoff. And
I think that more or less kind of leads into this last question I want to ask, and kind of bringing it all back to the lakes. Here in our Mendota watershed specifically, we're really trying to reduce a lot of raw manure, because of course that's going to reduce phosphorus loading to the lake. So maybe kind of walk through the incentives that could happen to produce more raw manure with more phosphorus capture add-ons to maybe generate more RNG. I think you kind of touched on that just now. Nutrient recovery and reuse is one of those practices that get highly rewarded by a system like this, both in terms of the carbon intensity and those change in practices and recovering nutrients. If that's a new practice for the farm, that qualify in the carbon offset market, and they could actually get paid for doing it. Well, we are at time. This was incredibly exciting. I want to thank Jessica Niekrasz and Tim Baye for giving us this very in-depth look at a very complex topic. If anybody had questions that didn't get answered, just go ahead and send them to us at info@cleanlakesalliance.org, and we'll try to push them out to Tim and Jessica and get you a comprehensive answer. And if any of this, you want to see this and go back and look at one of Tim's very intricate slides, of course, we've recorded this and it'll be up on our YouTube channel within a few days, and we'll have that link available as well. I want to thank everybody, of course, for joining us. Be sure to tune in again next month. It's September 8th. We're going to be talking about at-home water action. So what you can do at your own home to maybe help the lakes. Very simple things you can do to help the lakes at your own house. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Stay cool today and have a great day.